The smell hit me first, leather and bergamot, that expensive cologne Marcus wore on Tuesdays. Not the weekend cologne, the citrus one that reminded me of his mother's garden. Not the Friday night cologne that smelled like cedar and empty promises. Tuesday cologne, the one he wore to client meetings at Morrison and Fletcher, the investment firm where he smiled with all his teeth and none of his heart. I knew it was Tuesday before I opened my eyes. My cheek pressed against something cool and smooth. Not the hospital pillow I last remembered, the one that smelled like bleach and the particular staleness of dying alone. This was Egyptian cotton. 1,200 thread count. I'd picked it out myself at Bloomingdale's 3 years ago, arguing with the saleswoman about whether cream or ivory would photograph better when Marcus inevitably posted our bedroom on Instagram. I had chosen cream. The saleswoman had been right. Ivory would have been better. My hand moved to my face, fingers trembling as they traced the curve of my jaw. Smooth, no tubes, no plastic hospital bracelet cutting into the swollen flesh of my wrist. I flexed my fingers, and they obeyed. All 5 of them. Not the 3.5 I'd had before the second stroke took away my ability to hold a pen, to sign my own name, to do anything but lie there while Marcus brought his lawyers to my bedside with their sympathetic smiles and their papers that transferred everything into his name only. For my protection, he'd said. The lawyers had nodded. I'd tried to speak, but my mouth wouldn't form the words. The left side of my face hung slack, and all I could do was watch as Marcus squeezed my good hand and told me not to worry, that he'd take care of everything. He had. He'd taken care of everything. Now my face moved. My mouth opened and closed. My tongue touched the roof of my mouth and found all my teeth, the expensive veneers I'd gotten at 35, yes, but also the real molars in the back, the ones I'd lost to grinding and stress by 42. I sat up so fast the room spun, and I grabbed the nightstand to steady myself. The nightstand, our nightstand, the mid-century modern walnut piece I'd found at an estate sale in Connecticut. I'd refinished it myself, spending weekends in the garage with fine grit sandpaper and Danish oil while Marcus played golf with his father. The small crack near the bottom left corner where I'd dropped it, moving it upstairs. Still there. My phone sat on top, charging. An iPhone 12 in rose gold. I'd upgraded to a 15 before the first stroke. This was the phone I'd had when I was 38. 5 years ago. No, 7 years ago now, because I'd been 45 when I died. When my heart finally gave out in that hospital room while Marcus was in the Maldives with Simone, his assistant who wore her skirts short and her heels high, and her smile wide whenever she looked at my husband. Ex-husband, I'd thought in those last moments, because the divorce papers had been finalized 3 weeks before the second stroke. I'd signed them in the hospital, my lawyer holding the clipboard steady while my good hand shook so badly the signature looked like a child's scrawl. Not Marcus had gotten the house, the investments, the Mercedes in the garage, everything we'd built together, everything I'd built while he played golf and fucked his assistant and told me I was imagining things. I picked up the phone. The lock screen showed Marcus and me at his company retreat in Aspen, our faces pressed together, my smile wide and genuine because I hadn't known yet. I hadn't known about Simone or the others, or the way he'd been slowly, methodically moving assets into accounts I couldn't access, setting up the foundation for a divorce that would leave me with nothing. The date on the phone read September 14th, 2019, 3 months before I'd found the texts, 6 months before I'd filed for divorce, 2 years before the first stroke, 5 years before I'd died alone. My hands didn't shake now. They were steady as I unlocked the phone. The password was still Marcus's birthday because I'd been that kind of wife, and scrolled through my messages. There, a text from my mother asking if we were still coming for dinner on Sunday. Another from my friend Rachel about meeting for lunch at that French place on Fifth Avenue. A reminder from my dentist about my cleaning next week. All things that had happened. All things I remembered happening. I set the phone down carefully, deliberately, and walked to the bathroom. The marble floor was cold under my feet. We'd had radiant heating installed the year before I died, but this was still the old marble, the kind that sucked the warmth right out of your body on September mornings. The mirror showed me a face I hadn't seen in 7 years. 38 looked back at me, fine lines around my eyes. Yes, but soft ones. Laugh lines, people called them, though I couldn't remember what I'd been laughing at during this period of my life. My hair was still dark brown without the gray that had started creeping in at 40. My skin had the glow of someone who slept well and ate organic, and didn't know yet that her husband was planning to leave her with nothing. I looked healthy. I looked happy. I looked like a fool. The sound of the garage door opening rumbled through the house's bones. Marcus was home from his morning run, 5 miles every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday, a routine he maintained with the same dedication he brought to lying to my face. I heard his footsteps on the stairs, the familiar rhythm of his expensive running shoes on the hardwood we'd had refinished 2 years prior. "Babe?" His voice carried down the hallway. "Oh, you up?" I gripped the edge of the marble counter and stared at my reflection. This was real. This was happening. I had died in a hospital bed with the smell of antiseptic and roses. The funeral flowers Marcus had already ordered, I'd realized, seeing them on my nightstand 3 days before I died. And I had woken up here now, in a version of my life where I still had time. Time to do what? Exactly? The answer crystallized in my mind with the sharp clarity of morning light on glass. Everything differently. "Yeah," I called back, and my voice sounded strong and clear, not slurred, not weak. "I'm up." Marcus stood in the bedroom wearing his running clothes, his face flushed with exercise and whatever endorphins men like him produced when they ran away from the lives they'd built. He'd taken off his shirt. He always did. Padding around the house shirtless after runs, flexing unconsciously in any reflective surface, and his torso gleamed with sweat. I used to find it attractive. Now I saw the vanity in it. The way he angled himself toward the mirror on the closet door, checking his reflection while he pretended to be looking for a towel. "How'd you sleep?" he asked, not quite looking at me. "Fine." I walked past him to the closet, breathing in his sweat and cologne, and the particular smell of him that I'd once loved and then grown to tolerate, and finally, in those last months before the divorce, learned to hate. "You?" "Great. Ran into Tom Chen from Goldman. He's training for the marathon. Tried to get me to sign up." Marcus laughed, the sound easy and familiar. "Like I have time for that?" Tom Chen. The name sparked something. Tom Chen had been at our divorce mediation, representing Marcus, his college roommate turned high-powered attorney. Tom Chen had sat across from me and my lawyer and suggested, very reasonably, that since Marcus was the primary breadwinner, and I'd only worked part-time at the art gallery for the past 5 years, a 60-40 split was more than fair. My lawyer had argued for 50. We'd settled at 55, 45. Then Marcus had tied everything up in trusts and LLCs and claimed liquidity issues, and by the time the strokes hit, I'd received exactly $12,000 and a 2015 Honda Civic. "You okay?" Marcus was looking at me now, his brow furrowed with what might have been concern, or might have been the same expression he made when his stock portfolio dipped. I realized I'd been standing in the closet doorway staring at him. "Just thinking about what to wear," I said, pulling out a dress I remembered. Navy blue, the one that had made me feel sophisticated when I wore it to gallery openings. I donated it to Goodwill during the divorce purge, that week where I'd thrown away everything that reminded me of being Mrs. Marcus Chen. Mrs. Evelyn Chen. I'd gone back to Evelyn Morrison after the divorce, reclaiming my maiden name with more enthusiasm than I'd felt about anything in years. And then the first stroke had hit, and I'd been back to filling out medical forms with my ex-husband listed as my emergency contact because I had no one else. My mother dead, my father in a memory care facility. My friends drifted away or choosing Marcus's side because he was the one with the money and the connections. "Oi, we still on for dinner with the Hendersons tonight?" Marcus asked, heading toward the bathroom. The Hendersons, Robert and Cynthia Henderson. Robert was Marcus's boss at Morrison and Fletcher. Cynthia played tennis and did charity work and had never liked me, though she'd smiled to my face while telling other wives that I wasn't really from their world. She'd been right about that, at least. I'd grown up in Queens, daughter of a high school teacher and a nurse. I'd put myself through NYU on scholarships and student loans, worked 3 jobs to afford an apartment the size of the Hendersons' walk-in closet. I'd met Marcus at an art gallery opening. He'd been there for the free champagne and the networking. I'd been there because I loved the artist's use of negative space, and he'd been charmed by what he called my authentic background. Later, I'd realized he'd been charmed by the idea of me, the narrative of pulling a girl from Queens into his world of Connecticut estates and summer houses in the Hamptons. I was his project, his Eliza Doolittle, proof that he was different from other trust fund kids, until he'd gotten bored with the project. "Evelyn?" Marcus was in the bathroom doorway now, looking impatient. "The Hendersons?" "Right. Yes, 7:30 at that new place in Tribeca. I remembered this dinner. Robert Henderson had spent the evening talking about interest rates while Cynthia made pointed comments about my dress being bold, and Marcus drinking too much wine and laughing too loud at his boss's jokes. It had been the beginning of the end, though I hadn't known it then. Robert had promoted Marcus 3 weeks later, and with the promotion had come longer hours and more business trips and more opportunities for Marcus to be away from home. More opportunities for Simone. "You're acting weird," Marcus said, but he was already moving toward the shower, dismissing whatever strangeness he'd sensed. He was good at that, at dismissing things that required too much emotional energy to address. I sat on the edge of the bed and listened to the shower run, the pipes humming in the walls of our too big house in our too expensive neighborhood. We'd bought this place at the peak of the market, stretching ourselves thin because Marcus wanted the prestige of a Westchester address. I loved it at first. The high ceilings, the original crown molding, the garden where I'd planned to plant roses. I'd never planted the roses. The garden had remained empty except for the lawn service's quarterly maintenance, pristine and untouched and expensive. My phone buzzed. A text from Rachel. "Still on for lunch Friday? I'm dying to hear about the new gallery show." Rachel, my best friend from college, who'd stood by me through the divorce until she hadn't, until Marcus had offered her husband a job at Morrison and Fletcher, and suddenly Rachel was too busy for lunch. Too busy to return calls, too busy to be friends with the ex-wife when she could be friends with the golden couple of Marcus and Simone Chen. I'd seen them once, after the divorce, at a restaurant in Manhattan. Marcus and Simone and Rachel and her husband, all of them laughing, passing plates of tapas and bottles of wine. They hadn't seen me standing near the host stand, waiting for a table for one. I'd left before they could. Now I typed back, "Can't make Friday. How about next week?" I needed time. Time to think. Time to plan. Time to figure out what exactly I was going to do with this impossible gift of a second chance. The shower cut off. Marcus would emerge in exactly 7 minutes. He timed his post-shower routine like he timed everything. Efficient and optimized, and he'd expect me to be dressed and ready to pretend we were happy. I could do that. I'd done it for years the first time around. The thing about knowing the future is that it doesn't make you powerful. It makes you aware of your own powerlessness. I spent that Tuesday moving through my life like a ghost, haunting my own existence. I made Marcus his breakfast, egg whites and turkey bacon and black coffee, and I sat across from him at our marble kitchen island, and I nodded while he talked about his meetings, his strategy for the Henderson account, his thoughts on Q4 projections. I knew how it would end. Morrison and Fletcher would give him a 7-figure bonus in December. He'd take Simone to celebrate at Per Se, telling me he was at a client dinner. He'd start staying late on Thursdays, claiming the Henderson account demanded extra attention. By March, he'd have moved enough money into separate accounts that when I filed for divorce, my lawyer would spend months trying to untangle the finances, only to discover that Marcus had been planning this for a year, maybe longer. But I didn't know when it started. Not exactly. Not the precise moment when my husband decided I was disposable, so I watched him eat his eggs and drink his coffee, and I looked for signs. "You're staring," he said, not looking up from his phone. "Just thinking," I said. About? About how you're going to leave me with nothing. About how you're going to fuck your assistant and take your trips and build your new life while I'm drowning in legal fees and medical bills. About how you're going to visit me exactly twice in the hospital before deciding it's too inconvenient, too depressing, too much of a drain on your time. About what to wear tonight, I said instead. He nodded, satisfied, his attention already back on his phone. Probably texting Simone, or maybe not yet. Maybe Simone was still just his assistant, professional and efficient, not yet the woman who'd replace me. I'd never know for sure. Marcus left at 8:15, his briefcase in one hand, his travel mug of coffee in the other. He kissed my cheek on his way out. A habit, automatic, meaningless. His lips barely touched my skin. "Love you," he called from the garage. I didn't answer. The house settled into silence after he left, the kind of expensive silence that comes from good insulation and double-paned windows and neighbors spaced far enough apart that you can't hear their lives bleeding into yours. I stood in the kitchen and felt the weight of 7 years pressing down on me. 7 years of knowledge. 7 years of mistakes I could avoid and choices I could change and moments I could reclaim. but where to start? The obvious answer? Leave Marcus? File for divorce now, before he could position himself strategically. Before he could hide assets and build his case for why he deserved more than half. But I'd tried that already, hadn't I? I'd filed first, I'd hired a good lawyer, I'd done everything right, and I'd still ended up with nothing because Marcus was better at this than me. He understood money in a way I never had, understood the systems and the loopholes, and the way to make things disappear on paper while remaining entirely legal. I needed a different strategy. I walked through the house, cataloging everything I remembered. The art on the walls, mostly pieces I'd chosen, but Marcus had insisted they were joint purchases, community property. The furniture, same story. The Mercedes in the garage, titled in both our names, but I'd signed it over to Marcus as part of the settlement, along with the BMW he drove to work. The cars. I stopped in the hallway, my hand on the banister, a thought crystallizing. The Mercedes. Marcus loved that car. He'd special ordered it, spent hours customizing the interior, chosen the exact shade of silver that looked best in photographs. He'd posted it on Instagram the day it arrived, him leaning against the hood, casual and proud, the caption something about hard work and rewards. In the divorce, I'd signed it over without argument. My lawyer had advised against it. The car was worth $80,000, a significant asset, but I'd been so tired of fighting, and Marcus had wanted it so badly. He'd framed it as sentiment, as connection to happier times, and I'd believed him. Or I'd been too weak to fight. 3 months after the divorce was finalized, I'd seen him driving it with Simone in the passenger seat, her hair blowing in the wind, his hand on her knee. Now I walked to the garage and stood in front of the Mercedes. It gleamed under the fluorescent lights, perfect and pristine. Marcus kept it immaculate, washed it every weekend, detailed it quarterly. I opened the glove box and pulled out the registration. Both our names, just as I remembered, and underneath the registration, the loan documents. We'd financed it. I'd forgotten that detail, or maybe I'd blocked it out. Marcus had wanted to pay cash, but I'd argued that we should keep our liquidity, that a low-interest car loan made financial sense. He'd agreed eventually, though he'd hated the idea of debt. The monthly payment was $1,247. The balance, I checked the recent statement tucked behind the registration, was $62,338. In the divorce, I'd signed over the asset. But not the liability. The loan was in both our names. Jointly and severally liable, the document said. Either of us could be held responsible for the full amount. I'd forgotten about this, or Marcus had made me forget, had framed the car as a gift I was giving him, had glossed over the financial details in the rush to finalize everything. And then the strokes had come, and I'd been too sick to care about car loans and credit scores and the financial wreckage of my life. But now I had time. Now I had knowledge, now I had the clarity to see what I'd missed before. I pulled out my phone and took a photo of the loan documents, the registration, the account number. Then I carefully put everything back exactly as I'd found it and closed the glove box. The car sat there, beautiful and expensive, and tethered to a debt that would outlast my marriage. I spent the week watching Marcus. Not obviously, I'd learned subtlety in my first life, learned to hide my suspicions and swallow my questions, and pretend I didn't notice when he came home smelling like perfume that wasn't mine. But I watched. Thursday night, he stayed late. Client dinner, he said. I didn't ask which client. I already knew he'd be at Nobu with Robert Henderson and 2 associates from Goldman Sachs, a dinner that would end at 11 with cigars and bourbon, and Marcus stumbling into an Uber, jovial and loose-tongued and smelling like smoke. He came home at 11:47. I pretended to be asleep. Friday, he took a call in the garage, his voice low and warm, and I couldn't hear the words, but I knew the tone. That was new. In my first life, I hadn't noticed this. I'd been busy with gallery work, preparing for a show, trusting my husband when he said he was working late. Now I stood at the kitchen window and watched him pace in the driveway, phone pressed to his ear, smiling. When he came back inside, I was reading a magazine. Work call, he said. Unnecessary explanation. I said, not looking up. Saturday morning, I made an appointment with a lawyer. Not the one I'd used for the divorce. She'd been competent but overworked, stretched thin by too many clients and not enough time. This time I went to someone else. Someone I'd heard about in the art world. A woman who'd handled a high-profile divorce between a gallery owner and a hedge fund manager. Her name was Miriam Shaw, and her office was in a brownstone in the West Village. All exposed brick and mid-century furniture and fresh flowers on the reception desk. "Mrs. Chen," she said, shaking my hand. Her grip was firm, professional. She was younger than I expected, maybe 40, with silver glasses and a no-nonsense expression. "Morrison," I said. I kept my maiden name. "Of course. Please sit." She gestured to a leather chair across from her desk. "You mentioned on the phone that you wanted to discuss asset protection." I'd been vague on the phone, deliberately so. Now I sat in her office and felt the weight of what I was about to do. "I think my husband is planning to divorce me," I said. Miriam's expression didn't change. "What makes you think that?" How to explain? I know because I've lived through it already. I know because I've seen the future, and in that future he takes everything and leaves me with nothing, and I die alone while he's on vacation with his mistress. "Intuition," I said instead, "and some financial irregularities I've noticed." "Such as?" I'd prepared for this. "He's been moving money, small amounts but consistently, into accounts I don't have access to." This was a lie, or rather it was a truth from the future that I was pretending existed now. I had no evidence of Marcus moving money yet, but I knew he would. Eventually. Miriam made a note. "Do you have documentation?" "Not yet, but I will." She looked at me over her glasses. "Mrs. Morrison, I need you to understand something. If you're planning to divorce your husband, documentation is everything. You need bank statements, tax returns, account numbers, passwords. Anything that shows where the money is and where it's going." "I understand. And you need to move quickly. If he's already started hiding assets, we're behind." "I know," I leaned forward, "but I'm not ready to file yet. I need to prepare. I need to make sure I'm protected." "What kind of timeline are we talking about?" I thought about it. In my first life, I'd filed for divorce in March, 14 months from now. The process had taken 8 months, dragged out by Marcus's lawyers, by complicated financial discovery, by my own exhaustion and increasingly poor health. 6 months, I said. "Maybe a year." Miriam set down her pen. "That's a long time to prepare for a divorce you're not ready to file for." "I know it sounds strange. It sounds like you're scared." She wasn't wrong. I was scared. Scared of making the same mistakes. Scared of ending up in the same place. Scared that even with foreknowledge, I'd somehow find a way to lose again. "I need a different strategy," I said. Last time, I caught myself, but Miriam's expression had already shifted, sharpened. "Last time?" she repeated. I'd said too much, but maybe that was okay. Maybe I needed someone to know, someone to understand that this wasn't my first attempt at escaping Marcus Chen. "I filed for divorce from my husband before," I said carefully. "Different husband, different life. It didn't go well." "It was close enough to the truth." Miriam nodded slowly. "And this time, you want to do it right. This time, I want to protect myself. All right?" She pulled out a fresh legal pad. "Let's talk strategy." We talked for 2 hours. Miriam asked questions about our finances, our assets, our prenup. We didn't have one. Marcus had proposed with such romance that discussing divorce had seemed cynical. Our income streams, our properties. I answered carefully, mixing what I knew now with what I'd learned before. Yes, the house was jointly titled. Yes, we had investment accounts. Yes, Marcus's income was significantly higher than mine, but I'd contributed to our lifestyle in other ways, managing the household, supporting his career, maintaining our social connections. "The car," I said as we were wrapping up. "We have a Mercedes. It's financed, jointly." Miriam made a note. "Financed?" "Yes. About 60,000 still owed." "And you're both on the loan?" "Yes." She looked up. "That's unusual. Most couples with your income level would pay cash." I argued for financing. Better interest rate than our investments were earning. This was true. I'd made that argument. Marcus had hated it. In a divorce, Miriam said, jointly held debt can be complicated. Ideally, whoever takes the asset takes the debt. "And if I signed over the car but not the loan?" She set down her pen again. "Are you asking hypothetically?" "Yes." "Hypothetically, if you transferred the title but remained on the loan, you'd still be legally responsible for payments if your ex-husband defaulted. It would affect your credit, your debt-to-income ratio, your ability to secure financing for other purchases. But he would have the asset. Yes, without the associated liability, at least on paper. She paused. It would be a costly mistake. What if it wasn't a mistake? Miriam studied me for a long moment. I'm going to need you to be direct with me, Mrs. Morrison. Are you planning to use marital assets to financially disadvantage your husband? No, I said, and it was true. I wasn't planning to disadvantage him. I was planning to give him exactly what he wanted. The car? Just the car. Not the loan that came with it. I'm planning to protect myself, I said. And if that means being strategic about what I sign over and what I don't, then yes, I'm planning to be strategic. Miriam leaned back in her chair. I won't help you commit fraud. I'm not asking you to. But you are asking me to help you navigate a divorce in a way that maximizes your position while minimizing his. Isn't that what divorce lawyers do? She smiled, thin and sharp. Yes, it is. We scheduled another appointment for 2 weeks out. I paid her a retainer, $5,000 from an account Marcus didn't monitor, an old savings account from before we were married that still had my name only, and I left her office feeling lighter than I had in years. I had a plan. Or the beginning of one. October slipped into November with the kind of speed that makes you wonder if time is actually consistent or if it bends and stretches based on how much you're dreading what comes next. I knew what was coming. December. Marcus's bonus. $750,000, the biggest of his career. He'd be ecstatic, generous, buying expensive gifts and booking a vacation to Bali that we'd never take because I'd file for divorce in March, and he'd cancel it and go with Simone instead. January. The first signs that something was wrong with us. A fight about money, about my spending, about the gallery job that brought in $30,000 a year compared to his salary that had just jumped to $400,000, base plus bonus. February, the distance would become obvious. He'd start sleeping in the guest room, claiming his snoring was keeping me awake. I'd find the texts by accident, or what I'd thought was accident. Now I wondered if Marcus had wanted me to find them, if he'd been careless on purpose because it was easier than asking for a divorce. March. I'd file. He'd act surprised, the lawyers would start circling, but that was the old timeline. This time, I was changing the script. In late November, I suggested we refinance the house. Marcus looked up from his laptop, surprised. We were in the living room, the fireplace going, both of us pretending to enjoy a quiet evening at home. Refinance? Oh, why? Interest rates are good, I said. I'd been researching, preparing. We're still at 5.2%. We could get down to 3.8%, maybe lower. Save us $1,500 a month. This was true. It was also strategic. Marcus frowned. The paperwork would be a hassle. Less hassle than paying an extra $1,500 a month. He considered this. Marcus loved saving money more than he loved spending it. A trait he'd inherited from his father, who'd survived the recession by being ruthlessly efficient with every dollar. Let me think about it, he said. I didn't push. I'd planted the seed. 2 weeks later, I brought it up again. And again, 2 weeks after that. By the end of January, right on schedule with the old timeline when we'd started fighting, Marcus agreed to the refinance. But you're handling all the paperwork, he said. I don't have time. Of course, I said, smiling. I contacted 3 different lenders, got quotes, compared rates. I scheduled the appraisal and the title search and the credit check. I filled out all the forms, gathered all the documents, managed every detail. And in the process, I became intimately familiar with our financial situation. Every account, every asset, every debt, including the car loan, the Mercedes loan with its $62,338 balance, both our names on the paperwork, jointly and severally liable. In February, Marcus started staying late on Thursdays. The Henderson account is heating up, he explained, grabbing his briefcase on a Thursday evening. Robert wants daily updates. I was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for a dinner I'd eat alone. Of course. Don't wait up. I won't. He left. I heard the Mercedes start, the garage door close, the sound of expensive German engineering purring down our street. I set down the knife and pulled out my phone. I'd been tracking his location. Not secretly, we'd always shared locations, a safety feature we'd set up years ago and never disabled. I watched the blue dot that represented my husband drive south toward the city, watched it stop at a building in Chelsea I recognized. Simone's building. So it had started. Right on schedule, maybe a little early. Marcus and Simone, Thursday nights, while I made dinner for one and pretended not to notice. The old me would have been devastated. The new me set down my phone and went back to chopping vegetables. I needed him to want the divorce, needed him to think it was his idea, his choice, his escape from a marriage that had run its course. Because if Marcus wanted the divorce, he'd be reasonable about the settlement. He'd be generous, even, eager to move on to his new life with his new woman. He'd sign whatever I put in front of him, as long as it meant freedom. I'd learned this the first time, though I'd learned it too late to use it. By the time I'd figured out that Marcus was more generous when he was guilty, I'd already been devastated by his betrayal, already been angry and hurt and determined to fight. This time, I'd be smarter. This time, I'd be strategic. March arrived with the kind of weather that makes you believe in fresh starts. Cold but bright. The sun fierce against the last of winter's snow. I filed for divorce on March 15th. Not the contentious filing of my first life, where I'd listed infidelity and irreconcilable differences and demanded an immediate accounting of all marital assets. This time, I filed quietly, amicably. I used a mediator instead of a litigator, suggested we split everything 50-50, proposed a settlement that was so reasonable, Miriam had raised her eyebrows when I showed her the draft. "You're being too generous," she'd said. "I'm being strategic. He's going to wonder why you're making this so easy. He's going to be relieved." And he was. Marcus came home the day I filed. I'd had the papers delivered to his office, a gentle approach, private and discreet, and he'd looked almost grateful. "I didn't know you felt this way," he said. We were in the living room again, the fireplace cold this time, March not quite warm enough for outdoor dinners, but too warm for fires. "Though I think we've grown apart," I said, the script I'd prepared, gentle and final. "I think we want different things. I never meant to hurt you." This was a lie, but I let him have it. "I know. The settlement you proposed?" He had the papers in his hand, still crisp from the envelope. "It's fair. More than fair." "I just want this to be easy," I said, "for both of us." He looked at me with something that might have been respect, or might have been relief that I wasn't going to make this difficult. "The house," he said. "You're okay with selling?" In my proposed settlement, we'd sell the house and split the proceeds. It was worth $1.2 million. We'd bought it for $900,000. After the real estate fees and the mortgage payoff, we'd each walk away with about $220,000. Fair, clean, simple. "I think it's best," I said. "Fresh start for both of us." He nodded. "And the cars?" Here it was. "You keep the Mercedes," I said. "I'll keep the BMW." His face brightened. He'd been worried about this, I could tell. The Mercedes was his baby, his pride, his symbol of success. "Really?" "Really. I know how much you love it." "Thank you," he said, and he meant it. Thank you." "Of course." I paused. "I'll handle the title transfer. You just need to sign." "Whatever you need." It was almost too easy. Almost. The divorce took 4 months. Faster than the first time. Marcus was eager to finalize everything, eager to move forward with his life. Simone had been patient, I imagined, waiting in the wings. But patience had limits. In July, we met at Miriam's office to sign the final papers. Marcus brought Tom Chen, his lawyer friend, see who'd reviewed everything and given his blessing. I had Miriam, who'd prepared documents that were meticulous and thorough and entirely legal. We split the house proceeds. $218,000 each after all fees. We split the investment accounts, $340,000 each. We split the retirement accounts, the savings accounts, the art, the furniture, everything down to the wine collection in the basement. And then we got to the cars. The Mercedes-Benz S-Class, VIN number, Miriam read from the document, currently titled jointly to Marcus Chen and Evelyn Morrison, will be transferred solely to Marcus Chen. Tom Chen made a note. The BMW 5 Series, VIN number, Miriam continued, currently titled jointly to Marcus Chen and Evelyn Morrison, will be transferred solely to Evelyn Morrison. Another note. "Oh, both vehicles are currently financed," Miriam said. "The Mercedes has an outstanding loan balance of $58,943. The BMW has an outstanding loan balance of $31,287. I watched Marcus's face. He knew about the loans, of course. We'd discussed them briefly in the negotiation, but he'd been so focused on keeping the Mercedes that he hadn't pressed for details. The settlement agreement specifies that each party will assume responsibility for the loans on their respective vehicles, Miriam continued. Tom Chen looked up. Assume responsibility or refinance into individual names? This was the question. The important question. Miriam looked at me. We'd discussed this, planned this, prepared for exactly this moment. The agreement states that Marcus Chen will assume responsibility for payments on the Mercedes loan, and Evelyn Morrison will assume responsibility for payments on the BMW loan, Miriam said. Refinancing is encouraged but not required. Tom Chen frowned. So the loans remain in both names? Unless refinanced, yes. That's unusual. Marcus waved a hand, impatient. It's fine, I'll refinance it next month. Let's just get this done. Tom Chen looked like he wanted to argue, but Marcus was already reaching for a pen. If you're sure, I'm sure, the Mercedes is worth more than the loan balance. It's a non-issue. He signed. I signed. We divided our lives with ink on paper, and Marcus walked out of that office with his freedom, and his Mercedes, and his future with Simone stretching out before him like an open road. I walked out with my BMW and my settlement money and the knowledge that Marcus Chen had just signed his name to a very expensive mistake. The thing about car loans is that they're simple until they're not. You make your payments every month. The balance goes down. Eventually, you own the car free and clear. But if you stop making payments, the lender doesn't care whose name is on the title. They care whose name is on the loan. And if two names are on the loan, they can go after either one. Or both. I made my BMW payments religiously. $847 a month, auto-drafted from my checking account, never late, never missed. I watched my credit score tick upward, watched my debt-to-income ratio improve, watched my financial life stabilize, and I watched Marcus's Instagram. He posted the Mercedes regularly. New Sunday drive with a photo of the car against fall foliage. Ready for the week with the hood gleaming in his garage. Date night with Simone's hand on the passenger door, her ring finger conspicuously bare, but her smile wide and bright. They looked happy. I wondered if he was making the car payments. In August, I got a call from the loan company. Miss Morrison, this is Jennifer from Citibank Auto Lending. I'm calling about your Mercedes-Benz S-Class loan. I don't have a Mercedes, I said. I have a BMW. I understand, but you're listed as a co-borrower on the Mercedes loan, account number ending in 4,738. My heart rate didn't change. I'd been expecting this call, or one like it. What about it? We haven't received a payment for August. The payment was due on August 1st, and as of today, August 18th. We still haven't received it. Have you contacted Marcus Chen? He's the primary borrower. We've left several messages. We're required to contact both parties on jointly held accounts. I see. I paused. The car isn't in my possession. It was transferred to Mr. Chen as part of our divorce settlement. I understand, but the loan remains in both names. Both parties are responsible for the debt. Even though I don't have the car? Yes, ma'am. That's what jointly and severally liable means. I let the silence stretch. Ms. Morrison? I'm here. Thank you for letting me know. I'll reach out to Mr. Chen. We appreciate that. If we don't receive payment by August 31st, the account will be reported as 30 days past due to the credit bureaus. She hung up. I sat in my apartment, a one-bedroom in Brooklyn, nothing fancy, but it was mine, paid for with my settlement money and my gallery's salary, and I smiled. Marcus had missed a payment. One payment. Could be an oversight, a busy month, a forgotten autopay setup. Or it could be the beginning of something bigger. I didn't contact him. I didn't call, didn't text, didn't send a concerned email. I waited. September 1st came and went. No payment. September 18th, Jennifer from Citibank called again. Miss Morrison, we still haven't received payment for August or September. The account is now 45 days past due. I see. We need to discuss options for bringing the account current. Have you reached Mr. Chen? We've been unable to contact him. This was interesting. Marcus always answered his phone, always responded to messages. He was meticulous about communication, especially when it came to money. Unless he was avoiding the calls. Unless he knew exactly what was happening and was choosing to let it happen. What happens at 60 days? I asked. The account will be severely delinquent. It will significantly impact both your credit scores. At 90 days, we begin repossession proceedings. I understand. Miss Morrison, are you able to make a payment? I could. I had the money, $1,247 for August, another $1,247 for September, plus late fees. Call it $2,600 to bring the account current. I could pay it and protect my credit score and keep everything clean and proper. Or I could let Marcus drown. I'm not able to make a payment at this time, I said. Jennifer sighed. I understand. Please know that continued non-payment will result in serious consequences for both parties on this loan. I understand. Thank you for calling. I hung up and pulled up Marcus's Instagram. His most recent post was from 3 days ago. Him and Simone at a restaurant in Manhattan, champagne glasses raised, her hand now sporting a ring that caught the light like a small sun. The caption, "She said yes." They were engaged. Marcus had proposed to Simone, and he'd stopped making payments on the car he'd been so desperate to keep. I called Miriam. He's defaulting on the loan, I told her. The Mercedes? Yes, 2 months behind, almost 3. She was quiet for a moment. You knew he would. It wasn't a question. I suspected. Why? I thought about how to explain this. How to tell her that I'd lived through Marcus's financial patterns once before, that I knew he spent money when he was happy and hoarded it when he was planning something, that an engagement ring for Simone meant he was pouring money into his new life and neglecting the remnants of his old one. He's engaged, I said instead. He probably bought an expensive ring, probably planning an expensive wedding. The car payment slipped through the cracks. Expensive cracks. He'll start paying again, I said, once he realizes it's affecting his credit. Maybe he'll just let the car get repossessed and claim it's your fault for not refinancing the loan out of your name. This had occurred to me. Can he do that? He can try, but the divorce decree specifically states that he assumed responsibility for the Mercedes loan. If he defaults, you could sue him for damages. How long would that take? Months, maybe years, and it would cost you more in legal fees than you'd recover. So that option was out. What if I let it go to repossession? I asked. Then you both take the credit hit. It'll stay on your report for 7 years. It'll make it harder to get a mortgage, a car loan, even some jobs run credit checks. But he takes the hit too. Yes. I thought about Marcus's career, his reputation, his carefully constructed image of success. A repossession on his credit report wouldn't destroy him, but it would embarrass him. It would be a blemish, a crack in the facade. And if anyone found out, his boss, his clients, his colleagues, it would be a story. The golden boy of Morrison and Fletcher, unable to make his car payments. The man with the 7-figure bonus who let his Mercedes get repossessed. There's another option, Miriam said. What? You could make the payments, keep your credit clean, then sue him for reimbursement. You just said that would take years. It might, but you'd have documentation, proof that you paid his debt, and eventually, you'd win. Eventually. I'd died eventually, in my first life. I'd gotten $12,000, and a Honda Civic eventually. Eventually was a long time when you were drowning. I need to think about this, I said. Don't think too long. At 90 days, they'll start repossession, and once that process starts, it's hard to stop. I thanked her and hung up. My apartment was quiet. It was a Saturday afternoon, the kind of day when I used to spend hours at the gallery, talking to artists and collectors, discussing composition and color theory and the way light changed meaning. I'd quit the gallery job after the divorce, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. Because I'd taken my settlement money and decided to start fresh, to figure out what Evelyn Morrison wanted instead of what Marcus Chen's wife should want. I'd been working on my own art again, painting for the first time in years. Small canvases at first, just color and movement, working through the muscle memory of creation. Then bigger pieces, more complex, abstract landscapes that were really about emotion and time and the way the past bled into the present. I'd sold 2 pieces last month, through a small gallery in Bushwick. Not for much, but enough to feel like maybe I was building something real. Now I stood in front of my easel, looking at the canvas I'd been working on. Dark blues and grays, a storm, or maybe the ocean, or maybe just the feeling of being underwater. made of drowning in debt and lies and the weight of a life you didn't choose. I picked up my phone and pulled up Marcus's number. We hadn't spoken since the divorce was finalized. There'd been no reason to. We'd divided everything, signed everything, moved on. But we were still connected, weren't we? Still tied together by a car loan and a series of choices that had seemed reasonable at the time. I typed a message. The bank called about the Mercedes payment. You're 3 months behind. I didn't send it. Instead, I deleted it and set down my phone. Marcus had made his choice. He'd taken the car, signed the papers, agreed to the responsibility. Now he could live with the consequences. October came with the kind of finality that makes you believe in endings. The leaves turned and fell. The air went cold. The city shifted from summer's laziness into autumn's urgency. Everyone rushing, everyone busy, everyone pretending they had somewhere important to be. I got another call from Citibank. Miss Morrison, the account is now 90 days past due. We're initiating repossession proceedings. I understand. If payment is received in the next 5 business days, we can halt the repossession. Otherwise, the vehicle will be seized and sold at auction. Thank you for letting me know. I hung up and went back to painting. 2 days later, Marcus called. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won out. Evelyn. His voice was tight, controlled, angry underneath, but trying to hide it. Marcus. The bank is going to repossess the Mercedes. I know. They called me too. This is insane. I need that car. Then you should make the payments. I had some cash flow issues. I'm getting it sorted out. Cash flow issues? Marcus Chen, with his 6-figure salary and his 7-figure bonus, had cash flow issues. That's not my problem, I said. The loan is in both our names. It affects your credit too. I'm aware. So you're just going to let them repo it? Let both our credit scores tank? I'm going to let you handle the loan you agreed to handle. This is petty, Evelyn. This is what we agreed to in the divorce, I interrupted. You got the car. You took responsibility for the loan. The title is in your name. The car is in your possession. The only reason the bank is calling me is because you stopped paying. I'm engaged, he said, as if this explained everything. The wedding is expensive. Simone wants... I don't care what Simone wants. The silence on the other end was sharp, electric. I could sue you, Marcus said finally, for not refinancing the loan out of both our names. You could try, but the divorce decree says you assumed responsibility, not that you'd refinance. Big difference. You planned this. His voice had gone cold. You set this up. I could have denied it, could have played innocent, pretended I didn't know this would happen. Instead, I said, you planned to leave me with nothing? You moved money, you hid assets, you fucked your assistant while I was home making you dinner. You made me sign papers when I could barely hold a pen, when I was too sick to fight. Sicky, when I had nothing left. What are you talking about? I'm talking about the fact that you're a liar and a cheat and you thought you could have everything your way. The car, the girl, the perfect life. Well, congratulations, Marcus. You have the car. For now. I hung up before he could respond. My hands were shaking. Not from fear, not from anger, from something like satisfaction, like vindication, like the feeling of standing on solid ground after years of drowning. The Mercedes was repossessed on October 23rd, a Friday. I know because Marcus posted about it on Instagram. Not the repossession itself, that would be too humiliating, but a vague post about setbacks and challenges and coming back stronger. The comments were supportive, encouraging, full of people who didn't know that Marcus Chen's setback was his own fault. I didn't comment. I didn't like the post. I didn't do anything except screenshot it and save it to a folder on my phone labeled Receipts. 2 days later, my credit score dropped 98 points. I'd been expecting it, but it still stung. 7 years of perfect credit. Gone because of a car I hadn't driven in months. A loan I'd never wanted. A man who couldn't manage his own finances. But Marcus's score dropped too. I knew because Tom Chen called me. Evelyn, this is Tom Chen, Marcus's attorney. I remember. I'm calling about the Mercedes repossession. What about it? Marcus would like to discuss options for mitigating the credit damage. Such as? He's willing to pay you $10,000 to sign a statement saying the repossession was his fault and you had no knowledge of the missed payments. I almost laughed. Why would I do that? To protect your credit, to move forward, to let Marcus off the hook for his own mistakes. This affects you too, Evelyn. Don't pretend it doesn't. You're right. It does affect me. My credit score dropped 98 points, and I'll spend the next 7 years rebuilding it. But so will Marcus. He's willing to go to $15,000. No, $20,000. Tom, you could offer me $1 million and the answer would still be no, because this isn't about money. This is about Marcus learning that actions have consequences, that he can't just buy his way out of every problem he creates. That's vindictive. That's justice. I hung up. My phone rang again immediately. I declined the call, then a text from Marcus. We need to talk. I blocked his number. The credit hit was bad, but it wasn't devastating. I had savings from the divorce settlement, I had income from my art sales, and the freelance work I'd picked up, consulting for galleries, helping curate shows. I wasn't rich, but I was solvent, and I didn't need a car loan. The BMW was paid off, I'd used part of my settlement to clear the balance, and I planned to drive it until it died. Marcus, though. Marcus had a reputation to maintain, a lifestyle to fund, a wedding to pay for. And now he had a repossession on his credit report. I heard through the social network of our former shared friends, the ones who still spoke to me, mostly out of curiosity about the divorce, that Marcus had tried to buy another car and been denied financing. He'd had to pay cash, draining his savings, buying a used Lexus instead of the new Tesla he'd wanted. I heard that the wedding had been postponed. No official reason given, but Simone's Instagram had gone quiet, her ring photos deleted. I heard that Robert Henderson had pulled Marcus from the lead position on a major account, citing concerns about personal stability. I didn't know if any of it was true. I didn't care. Winter came early that year, November bringing snow and ice, and the kind of cold that makes you question why anyone chooses to live in New York. I spent Thanksgiving alone in my apartment, painting a canvas that was mostly white, layers of texture and light that represented nothing and everything. My father called from the memory care facility. He didn't remember my divorce, didn't remember Marcus, didn't remember much of anything. But he remembered that I painted, and he asked if I was still painting, and I told him yes. Good, he said. You don't let anyone stop you. I wouldn't. In December, I got a letter from Citibank. The Mercedes had been sold at auction for $35,000. The loan balance had been $56,218. After fees and costs, the deficiency was $23,847. I owed half of that. So did Marcus. $11,923.50 plus interest. The letter informed me that I had 30 days to pay, or they would begin collection proceedings. I called Miriam. Don't pay it, she said immediately. It'll go to collections. Let it. They'll try to collect from Marcus first. He's the primary borrower. And when they can't collect from him, then they'll come after you. But by that time, you'll have documentation showing that you attempted to contact Marcus about the missed payments, that you notified him of the repossession proceedings, that you did everything you could to mitigate the damage. Will that hold up in court? Maybe, maybe not, but it'll make the collections company think twice about pursuing you too aggressively. I thought about it. Thought about $11,923.50 and what that meant. Thought about my credit score, already damaged, and whether letting this go to collections would make it worse. Thought about Marcus, somewhere in the city, probably in his new used Lexus, probably still planning his wedding to Simone, probably still posting on Instagram about persistence and success and overcoming obstacles. Don't pay it, I said. Good. I hung up and went back to my painting. Christmas came and went. I spent it with Rachel, surprisingly. She'd reached out in November, a tentative text asking if I wanted to meet for coffee. I'd almost said no, remembering the way she'd chosen Marcus's side, the way she disappeared when I needed friends most. But that had been in my other life. In this life, Rachel didn't know about the strokes or the hospital or the way she'd abandoned me when I was dying. In this life, she was just my college friend who'd gotten caught in the middle of a divorce. We met at a cafe in the West Village, the kind of place with exposed brick and expensive lattes and the sound of MacBooks clicking. I'm sorry I've been distant, she said, wrapping her hands around her cup. The divorce put me in an awkward position. I know. Marcus kept asking about you, wanting to know if you were okay, if you were dating, if you'd said anything about him. This was new information. In my first life, I'd assumed Rachel had chosen Marcus because of the job he'd given her husband. Now I wondered if it had been more complicated than that. What did you tell him? That I hadn't talked to you, that I didn't know. She looked up. I should have reached out to you directly. I should have been a better friend. I could have held on to my anger, could have told her about the other timeline, the other life, the way her abandonment had felt. Instead, I said, "You're reaching out now." We spent Christmas together, Rachel and her husband and me, eating takeout Chinese food and watching old movies and pretending we were all fine. It was nice. It was normal. It was nothing like the Christmas I'd spent in my first life, alone in a hospital bed, watching nurses string up decorations and pretend they weren't working a holiday shift. So January brought the collection calls. Professional credit solutions, calling about the Citibank auto loan. Did I understand that I owed $11,923.50? Did I have a plan to pay? No, I told them. The debt will continue to accrue interest at 18% annually. I understand. We can work out a payment plan as low as $200 a month. I'm not interested in a payment plan. Miss Morrison, this debt is your legal responsibility. I'm aware. I'm also aware that Marcus Chen is equally responsible. Have you attempted to collect from him? A pause. We're in contact with both parties. Then contact him. He has the money. I don't. This was a lie. I had money. Not a lot, but enough to pay the debt if I chose to. I chose not to. The collection agency called weekly, then twice weekly. Then they sent letters, formal and threatening, to outlining the consequences of non-payment. I filed all the letters in a folder and ignored the calls. In February, I got a notice that Professional Credit Solutions had filed a lawsuit. They were suing both me and Marcus for the full deficiency balance plus fees and interest. Total amount, $27,438. I called Miriam. "This is expected," she said. "They're trying to scare you into paying." Is it working? Is it? I thought about it. Thought about being sued, about court dates and lawyers and the possibility of a judgment against me. Thought about Marcus being sued too, about the embarrassment of it, the professional consequences. "No," I said. "It's not working." "Good. I'll file a response. We'll argue that Marcus has superior ability to pay, that he assumed responsibility in the divorce decree, that you acted in good faith throughout the process. Will that work? Probably not, but it'll buy you time, and time is what you need." She was right. Time was what I needed. Time for Marcus to feel the consequences of his choices. Time for the weight of his debt to settle around his shoulders. Time for him to understand that he couldn't just walk away from his responsibilities and expect someone else to clean up the mess. The lawsuit moved slowly, the way lawsuits do. Filings and responses, discovery and depositions, months of legal maneuvering that cost more in lawyer fees than the actual debt. But Miriam had been right. The judge was sympathetic to my argument that Marcus, as the primary borrower and the party with superior income, should bear the greater responsibility. In May, the judge ordered Marcus to pay $20,000 of the deficiency, leaving me responsible for $7,438. It was more than I'd wanted to pay, but less than the full amount. And Marcus had to pay nearly 3 times what I did. I considered that a win. I paid my portion over 6 months, $1,239 a month, carefully budgeted from my income. It hurt, but not as much as dying alone in a hospital bed had hurt. I didn't know if Marcus paid his portion. I didn't check his Instagram, didn't ask our mutual friends, didn't care. He was out of my life, finally and completely, and that was enough. 2 years after the divorce, my credit score had recovered to 680. Not perfect, but functional. Enough to rent a better apartment, to finance a new project, to move forward. I'd opened my own gallery, a small space in Brooklyn that showed emerging artists and experimental work. It didn't make much money, but it made enough, and it made me happy. I painted in the mornings and ran the gallery in the afternoons, and spent my evenings with friends, Rachel and others, people I'd met through the art world, people who knew me as Evelyn Morrison the gallerist, not Evelyn Chen the ex-wife. I dated occasionally. Nothing serious. I wasn't ready for serious. Maybe I'd never be ready. In March, 3 years after I'd filed for divorce, I got an email from Tom Chin. Subject: Marcus Chen. Request for meeting. I almost deleted it, but curiosity won out. "Evelyn, I hope this email finds you well. Marcus has asked me to reach out regarding a personal matter. He would like to meet with you to discuss the car loan situation and its aftermath. He's prepared to make a financial offer in exchange for a signed statement regarding the circumstances of the repossession. Please let me know if you're willing to meet. Best, Tom Chen. I read the email 3 times, then I deleted it. 2 days later, Tom called. Evelyn, did you get my email? I did. And I'm not interested. Marcus is willing to offer significant compensation. 6 figures. I almost laughed. 6 figures. 3 years ago, that would have meant something. Now I had my own money, my own life, my own success that had nothing to do with Marcus Chen. Tell Marcus the answer is no. Can I ask why? I thought about how to explain it. How to articulate that this wasn't about money, had never been about money, was about something deeper and more fundamental than dollar amounts and credit scores. Because some debts can't be paid with money, I said finally. Tom was quiet for a moment. He's struggling, Evelyn. The repossession hurt his career. He's had to rebuild. Good, I said. Maybe he'll learn something? That's cold. That's consequences. I hung up. 5 years after the divorce, I sold my gallery. Not because it was failing, but because someone made an offer I couldn't refuse. A collector who'd been following my work, who wanted to turn the space into a foundation supporting emerging artists, who offered me a position as director with a salary that made me dizzy. I accepted. My credit score was 742. I'd paid off all my debts, including the car loan deficiency. I had savings, investments, a retirement account that was actually funded. I had a life. In October, I got an invitation to an art opening at a gallery in Chelsea. The artist was someone I'd shown early in her career, someone who'd gone on to bigger and better things. I almost didn't go. I was tired, and it had been a long week, and the idea of making small talk with collectors and critics felt exhausting. But I went anyway, because supporting artists was part of the job. The gallery was crowded, buzzing with the energy of opening night. I got a glass of wine and wandered through the exhibition, admiring the work, the way the artist had developed her style, the confidence in her brushwork. And then I saw him. Marcus. He was standing in front of a large canvas, studying it with the fake intensity people use when they're at art openings and don't know what to look at. He'd aged, lines around his eyes, gray at his temples, the softness in his jaw that came from too many business lunches and not enough time at the gym. He looked tired. He looked ordinary. I could have left. Could have slipped out before he saw me, avoided the awkward conversation, the forced pleasantries. Instead, I walked over. Marcus. He turned, and I watched the recognition hit. Surprise, then something else. Discomfort. Regret. Evelyn? I didn't know you'd be here. I know the artist. I showed her work at my gallery. Your gallery? He looked genuinely surprised. I didn't know you'd opened a gallery. I did. I sold it last year. Oh. He shifted his weight. Uncomfortable. That's great. Congratulations. We stood there in silence. 2 people who'd once shared a life, now strangers at an art opening. How's Simone? I asked, because I was curious and because I could. We're not together anymore. He said it flatly, matter of fact. We broke up about a year after the engagement. I'm sorry. Don't be. It wasn't right. I think I knew that, but I was trying to prove something, I guess. More silence. The car loan, he said finally. I should have handled that better. I should have... It's done, I interrupted. It's over. We both paid. We both moved on. I heard you paid your portion. I just wanted to say I'm sorry you had to. That wasn't fair. I could have agreed. Could have told him he was right, that it wasn't fair that he'd put me in an impossible position. Instead, I said, life's not fair, Marcus. We both learned that. He nodded, accepting this. You look good, he said. Happy? I am. I'm glad. And I thought maybe he meant it. We talked for a few more minutes. Small talk about the exhibition and the weather and our respective careers. Marcus was consulting now, having left Morrison and Fletcher after some unspecified restructuring. He'd bought a condo in Brooklyn, was dating someone new, was trying to figure out what came next. He sounded lost. I felt nothing. Not anger, not satisfaction, not even the vindication I'd expected to feel seeing him diminished, struggling, ordinary. Just nothing. When the conversation wound down, I excused myself and moved to another part of the gallery. I didn't look back to see if he was watching. I didn't care. 7 years after my rebirth, I woke up in my apartment on a Tuesday morning. The smell of coffee from the cafe downstairs, the sound of rain on the windows, the weight of good sheets, and the knowledge that I had nowhere to be for another hour. I lay there in the quiet and thought about the life I'd built. Not the life I'd planned back when I was Evelyn Chen, wife of Marcus, living in a house I didn't love with a husband who didn't love me. Not the life I died in, broken and alone and forgotten. But this life, the one I'd chosen piece by piece, decision by decision, consequence by consequence. I thought about the Mercedes, wherever it had ended up. Some used car lot, probably, sold to someone who didn't know its history, didn't know about the divorce or the repossession, or the two people whose lives had been tangled up in German engineering and Italian leather. I thought about Marcus, trying to rebuild, trying to move forward, carrying the weight of his choices. I thought about forgiveness, and whether I'd ever truly forgive him, and whether it mattered. I decided it didn't. So what mattered was this. I had survived. I had rebuilt. I had created something new from the ruins of what I'd lost. I got up and made coffee and sat at my easel, starting a new canvas. The painting would be about water, about drowning and resurfacing, about the way you could sink and think you'd never find air again, and then somehow, impossibly, you'd break the surface. You'd breathe. You'd live. And the world would be different than you remembered, but it would be yours, and that would be enough. I picked up my brush and began. Outside, the rain continued to fall, washing the city clean, and I painted through it, through the morning and into the afternoon, through the sound of my phone buzzing with messages I'd answer later, through the light changing from gray to gold as the storm passed and the sun emerged. I painted until my hands ached and my eyes burned and the canvas showed something true. And then I stepped back and looked at what I'd made. It was good. It was mine. It was enough. 10 years after I'd signed the car over to Marcus Chen, I stood in my own gallery, a new one, bigger than the first, in a better neighborhood, and watched collectors move through an exhibition of my work. My paintings hung on white walls, each one a chapter of the story I'd lived twice, the early pieces, dark and turbulent, about drowning, the middle period, sharp and angular, about anger, and the recent work, softer but no less complex, about survival and grace and the way light changes everything. A woman approached me, catalog in hand. "Miss Morrison, I wanted to ask about this piece." She gestured to a large canvas, mostly blues and silvers. "Oh, a storm or an ocean or both." "What about it?" "The title, After the Flood." "What does it mean?" I looked at the painting, at the work I'd made from memory and pain, and the strange gift of a second chance. "It means you can drown," I said. "You can go under, feel the water fill your lungs, think you'll never breathe again. And then, somehow you surface. You find air. You discover that after the flood, there's always dry land. You just have to swim long enough to find it." The woman nodded, still studying the canvas. "I'll take it," she said. I smiled. Good choice. She left to arrange payment, and I stood alone in my gallery, surrounded by the evidence of my survival. My phone buzzed. A message from Rachel. "Dinner tomorrow? I have news." I typed back, "Yes, tell me everything." Another message. This one from my accountant. "Q4 numbers are strong. Gallery's profitable." Another from an artist I was considering for a spring show. "I'd be honored to work with you." Life, I thought, had a rhythm to it. Not the rhythm you planned, not the steady beat you expected, but something wilder, more complex, full of unexpected changes and sudden silences and moments where everything aligned just right. I'd learned to dance to it. I'd learned to let the current carry me when I needed to rest, and to swim hard when I needed to move. I'd learned that revenge wasn't about destroying someone else. It was about refusing to let them destroy you. And I'd learned that sometimes the best revenge wasn't revenge at all. It was living well. I locked up the gallery and walked out into the New York evening, the air cool and crisp, thinking autumn settling in with its usual drama. Somewhere in this city, Marcus Chen was living his life, probably still struggling, still trying to rebuild his reputation, still carrying the weight of choices he'd made a decade ago. I hoped he'd found peace. I hoped he'd learned his lessons. But mostly, I didn't think about him at all. I had my own life to live, my own paintings to make, my own story to write. And this time, I was writing it myself. No ghosts from the past, no fear of the future, just the present moment, sharp and real and mine. I walked home through the city I loved, through the streets that had witnessed my death and my rebirth, my failure and my success, my drowning and my surfacing, and somewhere in the distance, I could hear it, the sound of an engine starting, a car pulling away from a curb, driving off into a future that held no promises, only possibilities. I smiled and kept walking. The weight of chrome and gasoline was behind me now. All that remained was the lightness of letting go, and the sweet, surprising grace of beginning again.